On January 30th, 1649, a platform stood draped in black outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, London. A scaffold hastily constructed awaited a man who was not a common criminal, but a reigning sovereign, King Charles I of England, Scotland and Ireland. His execution, observed by a grim and silent crowd, was an unprecedented act in European history. It was not a spontaneous riot or a secretive assassination, but a public, legally framed regicide ordered by a High Court of Justice assembled by the Rump Parliament. For the King's eldest son, Prince Charles, then an 18-year-old exile in The Hague, the news arrived with a chilling finality. He was no longer the Prince of Wales. He was now, in the eyes of his scattered supporters and most European monarchs, King Charles II, a monarch without a kingdom, inheriting a civil war, a republican government in London, and the profound, almost unimaginable trauma of his father's judicial killing. This narrative will investigate how these exceptional circumstances, marked by systemic political violence and a brutal reimagining of sovereignty, forged the man who would eventually reclaim his crown, and how a lifetime in exile shaped a king unlike any before him. To comprehend the environment that shattered the English royal family, one must first understand the volatile state of England in the decades preceding 1649. The early 17th century was characterized by escalating tensions between the Stuart monarchy and Parliament, an ancient institution rapidly asserting new claims to power. King Charles I, who had ascended the throne in 1625, held an unwavering belief in the divine right of kings. This doctrine, popular among absolute monarchs across Europe, asserted that a monarch's authority derived directly from God, placing him above parliamentary oversight and answerable only to the divine. This philosophical stance clashed directly with Parliament's growing assertiveness regarding its rights, particularly over matters of taxation and legislation, which it saw as its constitutional prerogative. Beyond these political disputes, profound religious divisions further exacerbated the rift. Charles I's Anglican reforms, often perceived by many staunch Protestants, particularly Puritans, as too close to Catholic practices, ignited widespread dissent and accusations of popish leanings within the Church of England. Economic grievances, stemming from royal attempts to raise funds through controversial levies like ship money without parliamentary consent, added further fuel to the simmering conflict, eroding public trust. These were not mere disputes over policy, but fundamental clashes over governance, power distribution, and national identity, gradually pushing the kingdom towards an inevitable and violent confrontation. One might observe that both sides, with equal conviction, believed they were acting in God's name, which, as history often demonstrates, rarely simplifies matters. The personal reign of Charles I, from 1629 to 1640, saw him rule without parliament, a period often referred to as his 11 years' tyranny by his opponents, a rather dramatic moniker that nevertheless captured the public mood in certain circles. During this time, he relied on controversial fiscal measures such as ship money, a tax traditionally levied only in coastal areas for naval defense, which he extended to inland counties during peacetime, asserting a royal prerogative to raise funds independently. His marriage to Henrietta Maria of France, a devout Catholic, further deepened the suspicions of many in Protestant England. Her strong personality and perceived influence over the king were viewed with considerable alarm, as many feared a return to Catholic dominance. Into this increasingly unstable political environment, their children were born, including Charles, the eldest son and heir, born in 1630. Their childhood was initially spent within the grand, albeit increasingly anxious, confines of royal palaces like Whitehall and Hampton Court, insulated from the growing public discontent. They engaged in the usual royal pastimes, tutored in languages, history and the arts, preparing for a future that seemed, to them, assured by divine right. However, as the political climate deteriorated, marked by events such as the Scottish Covenanter Rebellion, which protested royal religious policies, and the Irish Rebellion of 1641, which unleashed horrific violence, the illusion of royal stability began to crumble. The escalating crisis gradually encroached upon their sheltered existence, transforming the royal children from privileged heirs into potential pawns in a national struggle, illustrating how deep-seated political conflicts can fundamentally reshape personal and familial security, even for those at the very top. The irony, of course, was that a king so intent on controlling his kingdom ultimately lost control of his own family's fate. By August 1642, the irreconcilable differences between King Charles I and Parliament had fully escalated into open warfare. The king raised his standard at Nottingham, effectively declaring war on his own parliament. The initial skirmishes quickly escalated into a full-scale civil conflict, forcing the royal family to make strategic and increasingly desperate decisions for their safety and the preservation of the monarchy. Queen Henrietta Maria, recognizing the urgent need for financial support and military aid from abroad, was compelled to leave England in 1642, taking some of her younger children, including the infant Princess Henrietta Anne. She embarked on a perilous journey to the continent, leveraging her familial connections to secure resources for the royalist cause. Prince Charles, though still in his early teens, was tasked with a nominal but symbolically significant military role, accompanying his father in various campaigns, including the Battle of Edgehill. He was present as a visible figurehead, learning the grim realities of warfare firsthand, though largely kept from direct combat. However, as royalist fortunes declined following decisive defeats like Marston Moor in 1644 and Naseby in 1645, where Parliament's new model army demonstrated its military superiority, the king's ability to protect his children and maintain his position diminished significantly. The strategic decision to send Prince Charles away from England became not merely a precaution but a matter of absolute survival, a political imperative to secure the succession, marking a pivotal moment of forced separation and the fracturing of the royal family unit. One might say the royal children were receiving a very practical, if unpleasant, lesson in statecraft. With the royalist cause collapsing under the weight of parliamentary military superiority and King Charles I's capture becoming an ever-present threat, the strategic necessity of ensuring the Prince of Wales's safety became paramount. To prevent his capture by parliamentary forces, which would have given the Parliament a powerful bargaining chip and potentially ended the royalist line, Prince Charles embarked on a series of perilous flights in 1646. He first moved from the relative safety of Oxford, the royalist capital, to the Scilly Isles, a remote archipelago off the coast of Cornwall. From there he proceeded to Jersey, another crown dependency, still seeking a secure refuge within English dominion but away from the mainland. Eventually it became clear that mainland Europe offered the only sustainable sanctuary. He crossed the Channel to France, rejoining his mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, and other siblings in Paris. This exile was not merely a physical relocation across a short stretch of water, it signified a profound and humiliating shift in his status. He was no longer a prince within his own realm, but a supplicant in foreign courts, reliant on the hospitality and political maneuvering of other European powers for his very subsistence. His youth was now defined by displacement, the constant negotiation of alliances, and the agonizing precarity of a life lived without a kingdom, a situation that would last for years. It laid the groundwork for a cautious and adaptable character, forged by the relentless pressure of circumstance, and gave him an education in diplomacy that few future monarchs would ever experience. While Prince Charles navigated the complexities of life as a royal exile, a dramatic and unprecedented event unfolded back in England, changing the course of British history. Following his capture by parliamentary forces in 1646 and subsequent escape and recapture during the Second Civil War, King Charles I was brought to trial in January 1649. This was not a secret assassination carried out in the shadows, but a public, deliberate, and legally framed proceeding by the Rump Parliament and its specifically established High Court of Justice. The charges levelled against the king were grave and revolutionary: treason for waging war against his own parliament and by extension against the people of England. This trial was in itself a revolutionary act, a direct challenge to the centuries-old concept of the divine right of kings, asserting instead that a monarch was accountable to the law and to his subjects, a notion that horrified many across Europe. Despite the king's steadfast refusal to recognise the court's legitimacy, maintaining that no earthly authority had the right to judge a divinely appointed king, the proceedings culminated in a conviction. This outcome demonstrated a profound shift in the balance of power, a radical redefinition of political authority in England, and perhaps a certain grim determination on the part of Parliament to see their convictions through, come what may. On January 30th, 1649, a cold and sombre Tuesday, King Charles I was led from St James's Palace to a scaffold erected outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, London. The king, dressed carefully to avoid shivering and appearing afraid, spoke briefly, asserting his innocence of treason and affirming the rights of the people as residing in the law, not in popular consent. In a highly public spectacle, watched by a silent, stunned crowd that filled the street below, he knelt, and his head was severed with a single blow of the axe. A groan, according to contemporary accounts, rose from the assembled thousands, though some historians suggest it was more a collective sigh of shock. The impact of this act sent shockwaves across Europe, fundamentally altering the landscape of power dynamics and monarchical authority, demonstrating that no monarch was truly safe from the judgment of their own subjects. For Prince Charles, then residing in The Hague, news of his father's death was delivered by messengers. While the exact immediate emotional impact on him in that moment is a subject of historical interpretation, few detailed accounts from his perspective survive. The factual ramifications were undeniable and immediate. He was now, in the eyes of his scattered royalist supporters and most European monarchs, the rightful King Charles II, but a king without a kingdom, a monarch whose throne had been violently vacated by his own subjects. This event was not merely a personal tragedy, but a political cataclysm that directly shaped his subsequent actions and worldview, forcing him to confront the ultimate consequences of political failure and the chilling precedent that had been set. It was, one might say, a rather stark inauguration into kingship. Upon his father's execution, Charles II faced an immediate and profound challenge: how to reclaim a throne that no longer formally existed. England had declared itself a commonwealth, a republic, effectively nullifying the monarchy and establishing a new form of government. His initial attempts to restore his rule were met with repeated failures and significant personal risk. He first landed in Scotland in 1650, after lengthy and often humiliating negotiations, agreeing to strict Covenanter terms which required him to sign the Solemn League and Covenant, endorse Presbyterianism, and renounce his father's policies. This was a bitter pill for a high church Anglican, but a political necessity. Under these terms, he led a Scottish army into England, only to suffer a decisive and catastrophic defeat by Oliver Cromwell's forces at the Battle of Worcester in September 1651. Following this crushing blow, he became the most wanted man in England, a price on his head. He embarked on a dramatic and desperate 6-week flight across England, famously hiding in an oak tree at Boscobel House to evade his pursuers, and eventually escaping to France disguised as a servant. This escape was a testament to his resourcefulness, resilience, and a dash of good fortune under immense duress. The subsequent 9 years were spent in renewed, often impoverished exile across various European courts, France, the Spanish Netherlands, and Germany. His existence became one of constant uncertainty, reliant on intermittent foreign subsidies and the fluctuating political fortunes of his hosts. This period cemented a deep-seated pragmatism and a pervasive sense of caution in his character, traits that would define his later reign, as he learnt firsthand the value of discretion and the perils of overconfidence. During his extended exile, which stretched for years after the Battle of Worcester, Charles II engaged in continuous, often desperate, diplomatic efforts across Europe. He sought material aid, military support, and crucial political recognition from fellow monarchs, including his young cousin King Louis XIV of France and King Philip IV of Spain. His presence in their courts was a constant, if sometimes inconvenient, reminder of their shared monarchical vulnerability in the face of burgeoning republicanism in England. He resided for periods in Paris, Cologne, and Bruges, shifting his small, impoverished court as political winds and financial constraints dictated. However, these interactions often yielded limited practical success. European powers, while nominally sympathetic to a fellow monarch in distress, generally prioritized their own complex interests and largely avoided direct military confrontation with the powerful and formidable English Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell. Charles, despite his lineage, often found himself a political pawn, a symbol of royal legitimacy, but one whose actual power was negligible. He became adept at navigating the intricate web of European diplomacy, making alliances, enduring snubs, and meticulously observing the workings of other courts. He learned invaluable lessons in political opportunism and the fickle nature of international support, particularly how swiftly allegiances could shift based on perceived strength and self-interest. These years exposed him to the harsh realities of power politics, fostering a cynical yet pragmatic understanding of statecraft, a far cry from the divine right principles he had inherited. One might say he earned his diplomatic stripes the hard way, through perpetual financial desperation and the constant need to please his hosts. The protracted period of exile, marked by profound personal loss, political impotence, and constant uncertainty, profoundly shaped Charles II's personality and later kingship. He was a boy when the Civil War began, a teenager when his father was executed, and a young man when he endured repeated attempts to regain his throne, only to be forced into a precarious existence abroad. He developed a deep-seated pragmatism born from years of necessity, learning to prioritize survival and stability above rigid ideological adherence. His public charm, well documented by contemporaries who noted his easygoing manner and quick wit, often masked a private cynicism and a deeply guarded nature. He learned to trust few and to keep his true intentions concealed, a natural adaptation for someone who had seen family members betrayed and a father executed by those he believed were his subjects. Historians frequently point to his cautious approach to governance, his aversion to confrontation with Parliament, and his emphasis on personal pleasure and amusements, which can be interpreted not merely as self-indulgence, but as a coping mechanism for the profound trauma and constant political insecurity he had endured since childhood. He preferred to walk away from a fight, a stark contrast to his father's often inflexible and confrontational style. a habit perhaps cultivated by the sheer exhaustion of continuous political struggle and the trauma it engendered. While Charles II endured the often humiliating existence of exile, the Commonwealth government in England faced its own inherent instabilities and contradictions. Despite Oliver Cromwell's formidable leadership as Lord Protector, his regime struggled to establish a stable and broadly accepted political system that could endure beyond his personal charisma and military strength. The army's pervasive influence, which had been the backbone of the parliamentary victory, became a source of constant tension, as many sought a return to civilian rule. Coupled with internal divisions among various Republican and religious factions, Puritans, Levellers, Diggers, and others, there was a climate of ongoing political tension and a lack of consensus on the future direction of the nation. Cromwell's death in September 1658 further destabilised the Protectorate, leading to a succession crisis with his son Richard Cromwell, proving unable to command the same authority and loyalty. A power vacuum emerged, and the delicate balance of power within the army and parliament began to unravel. The public, weary of military rule, high taxation, and the often puritanical social restrictions imposed by the new regime, grew increasingly nostalgic for the perceived stability, order, and traditional liberties associated with the old monarchy. This significant shift in public sentiment, combined with the internal disarray within the Republican government, created an unexpected but undeniable window of opportunity for the exiled king, proving that even the most revolutionary governments can wear out their welcome. The opportunity for Charles II's return to England emerged through a complex and ultimately decisive political manoeuvre orchestrated by General George Monk, a key military figure under the Commonwealth, commander of the forces in Scotland. Monk, a pragmatic and shrewd soldier, recognised the widespread desire for order and the limitations of continued Republican rule, particularly after the Protectorate's decline into factional infighting. He strategically marched his army south from Scotland to London, carefully maintaining an appearance of neutrality, before openly declaring for a free parliament and ultimately for the restoration of the monarchy. Charles II, demonstrating the shrewd pragmatism he had learned during his years of exile, played his hand carefully. From Breda in the Spanish Netherlands, he issued a crucial document in April 1660, known as the Declaration of Breda. This declaration offered general pardons for actions committed during the Civil War, religious toleration within limits, assurances for land settlements, and arrears of pay for the army, all conditional upon Parliament's approval. It was a remarkably astute political act, designed to soothe anxieties about widespread reprisals and to appeal to a broad spectrum of English society. It stood in stark contrast to his father's earlier inflexibility and demonstrated Charles II's willingness to compromise for the sake of peace and his crown. His triumphant return to England in May 1660, culminating in his entry into London on his 30th birthday, was met with public jubilation, signalling a national yearning for stability and a return to traditional forms of governance, regardless of the traumas that had preceded it. Even the English weather, it seemed, was prepared to offer a sunny disposition for the occasion. Charles II's reign from 1660 to 1685, a quarter century on the throne, was profoundly shaped by the experiences of his traumatic youth. The public execution of his father and his long, precarious exile instilled in him a deep-seated caution and an almost pathological aversion to open conflict with Parliament. Unlike Charles I, who had famously dissolved Parliament and attempted to rule without it, Charles II rarely pushed the boundaries of royal prerogative to the point of confrontation, instead employing negotiation, patronage, and sometimes even subtle duplicity to achieve his aims. He understood that direct confrontation could lead to disaster, a lesson learned with devastating clarity from his family's history. His emphasis on stability and reconciliation was a direct response to the Civil War's devastation and the deep divisions it had left. Guiding his approach to religious policy and national governance, he tried at various points to implement broader religious toleration, though often thwarted by a fiercely Anglican Parliament. While often portrayed, particularly in later historical accounts, as a pleasure-loving monarch, known as the Merry Monarch for his witty court and numerous mistresses, this public pursuit of diversion can also be interpreted not merely as indulgence, but as a psychological coping mechanism, a way to escape the heavy weight of a crown acquired through such unprecedented trauma and the constant demanding political maneuvering required to retain it. He was, after all, a man who had seen his family shattered by the very systems he now had to navigate. The popular image of Charles II often centres on his renowned charm, his well-documented mistresses, and the supposed gaiety of the Restoration Court, a period of cultural resurgence after the austere years of the Commonwealth. However, a deeper historical investigation reveals a monarch whose character was deeply etched by the unique and profound traumas of his upbringing. While not mentally broken in the sense of functional incapacity, He exhibited a pervasive cynicism regarding human nature and political loyalties, a detached pragmatism that prioritized survival above all else, and a distinct lack of idealism that contrasted sharply with his father's convictions. These traits can be interpreted as survival mechanisms honed by his experiences, witnessing his father's public execution from afar, living for years as a stateless and impoverished exile, and navigating treacherous political landscapes where loyalty was often conditional. Historians frequently note his guarded nature, his reticence on deeply personal or sensitive political topics, and his tendency to prioritize immediate security and comfort over long-term strategic vision. His remarkable ability to charm and disarm, often used to great political effect, masked a fundamental distrust of people and systems, a legacy of the violence and betrayal that had defined his early life. It was a sophisticated and necessary defense mechanism, allowing him to operate effectively in a world that had, for him, proven incredibly dangerous. The story of Charles II is more than a tale of royal restoration. It is a profound historical case study on the enduring, often invisible impact of systemic political cruelty. His life demonstrates how regicide, civil war, and prolonged exile can fundamentally forge a monarch defined less by ideological conviction and more by a shrewd, often cynical will to survive. By examining the factual circumstances of his early life, the enforced separations from his mother and siblings, the chilling news of his father's public execution, the years of precarious and often humiliating existence in foreign courts, we are compelled to move beyond romanticized notions of the merry monarch and confront the true, unsettling cost of political upheaval on an individual. Charles II's reign, while outwardly stable and often celebrated for its cultural flourishing, was in many ways an ongoing negotiation with the shadow of his past, a constant effort to avoid the catastrophic fate that had befallen his father. His strategic flexibility, his aversion to confrontation, and even his pursuit of pleasure can all be understood as responses to the deep-seated anxieties of a man who had seen the absolute fragility of power firsthand. His story serves as a critical reminder that history's grand narratives often obscure the profound personal traumas inflicted by power struggles, demanding a re-evaluation of how we interpret leadership forged in the crucible of unprecedented violence. He never forgot the scaffold at Whitehall, and that memory, silent and pervasive, shaped every decision he made on the throne.